everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to just start out by just expressing my gratitude to each of you who have taken time, put time apart to take a look at your own marriages, to take a look at your own family life, and to really improve and grow in it. We know it's a busy time for all of you with your children at home. So this is valuable time, and so we appreciate that. This is our first session of a parenting series, three sessions, and the title of today's talk is How to Thrive or Survive in Marriage in the Busyness of Raising Children. And my name is Sister John Mary Sullivan. I am an Associate Director with the Ministries and Outreach at the Archdiocese of Vancouver. And right now we're also being provided support, behind the scenes support tonight from some of my colleagues, Melanie Caras and Adelia Cordero. So I thank them. It's essential support. And I also want to just give a great big thanks to Denis, and I'll share more about Denis Boyd after we take a moment to pray together. Just to let you know that during the presentations, you have the opportunity to ask questions. There's a Q&A button below that you will see. So feel free to put any questions you have. After Denis Boyd's presentation, we will take those questions and he will be answering them. So let's begin tonight with our prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, you have given us the model of life in the Holy Family of Nazareth. Help us, O loving Father, to make our families a place where love, peace, and joy reign. Help us to stay together through the joys and sorrows of life. Teach us to see Jesus in the members of our families. May we love one another as God loves each one of us more and more each day. And forgive each other's faults as you, Lord, forgive our sins. And we ask the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the cause of our joys, to pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Holy guardian angels, be always with us, guide and protect our marriages and our children. Amen. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you, Denis.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to give you everyone a little background on Denis. Denis Boyd has actually been helping us out at the Archdiocese for many, many years with our marriage prep program, in which he does a whole presentation on communication skills. And we always get very high ranking evaluations for Denis's presentation. Denis has an MA in counseling psychology from UBC. He is a member of the BC College of Psychologists and BC Psychological Association. He's the founder of the Denis Boyd and Associates Office, which offers expert and dedicated psychologists and counselors who really give of themselves. We often recommend people wwho call the Archdiocese to Denis Boyd and Associates, knowing that they will be provided with tremendous help. Denis has been presenting for us not only in marriage prep, but he covers a wide variety of topics, including marriage, grief, and all kinds of family dynamic and relationship talks. So once again, we always hear very good feedback from the parishes that have Denis come and speak. Most importantly, he says, is that Denis has been married now, how many years, Denis?
48.
48 years, and he has
counting.
And counting. And he has 4 children. And at this time, how many grandchildren, Denis?
Just 4 at the moment.
Just 4.
Yeah.
So 4 children and 4 grandchildren. So not only can he speak from a place of expertise and education, but from a real lived experience. And that is what makes you so invaluable. So thank you. And with that, I'll let you start.
Thank you so much. I'll just share the screen here so we can see the slides. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you all, to take a little time to focus on this topic. of surviving in marriage or dealing with marriage, and the simplicity of this COVID experience we're going through is that we have a chance to get together in the comfort of our own homes, don't have to travel out, worry about babysitters and whatnot. So here we are. So tonight, how to thrive in marriage amidst the busyness of raising children. The original title I used when I used to do this talk with preschool parents years ago was how to survive and thrive in marriage while raising children. But the truth is that the strategies we're going to look at tonight will help you survive and thrive in marriage regardless of whether you're raising children or traveling the world. Or, in fact, I've seen some of these same strategies work very well for sisters in community, brothers and priests in community. So there's sort of the basic skills that families use, whatever their setting in community, as they try to grow and do God's will in their midst there. Well, here are the topics we're going to touch on tonight. You may say to yourself, well, gosh, looks like we're going to be here till midnight, but we're not. A couple of these I will spend a fair amount of time on. Others I'll just skip right over. But we're going to talk about attitude. Attitude sort of sets the stage for everything else we do. However, even though we have good attitude and good plans, sometimes we have to take a look at our past and make sure we're at peace with it. And I'll explain a little more of that to you as well. Every couple I ever worked with and or probably ever will work with, I get them doing something called tea time. And it's sort of a regular connection time. But to do that, you need to work on your communication skills and particularly on listening. The communication skill that seems to be the most crucial is this business of listening. Sometimes though, people get off track, and so we have a time out, time in strategy that'll make it safe for people to go ahead and explore their ideas without worrying too much about conflict. And probably the key concept we're going to spend time on tonight to some degree is this one: consult and collaborate. If I was to name a type of marriage therapy, it would be marriage collaboration therapy. Collaboration seems to be crucial to our success as parents, as couples, as members of community. Doesn't hurt to learn a few parenting skills. And this program that we're starting tonight, you'll have some other excellent ones coming up, which will deal with some very specific parenting skill ideas. You'll hear about date night. You may already be doing that. The church talks a lot about forgiveness, psychology not so much, but we're going to talk about forgiveness a bit tonight. And then, of course, if at all possible, find yourself a sense of humor, because life's too important to be taken seriously. So let's start off with attitude. When I'm working with the engaged couples, I often tell them the story of this couple I met a couple of years ago. They're a couple that were struggling with their revised marriage. And by revised marriage, I meant that their eldest child had finally moved out. Their second eldest, they only had two, had also moved out, and they were, as the saying goes, empty nesters. And so in the process of being empty nesters, they were rediscovering their relationship with each other. And this was turning out to them, or for them, to be a bit of an adventure, because they had discovered after the children left that they had managed to grow apart. And they grew apart because they were super parents. They took really good care of their kids, and each of them sort of took responsibility for different areas. And they did so well at parenting, and including coaching and other things, they forgot that they were married. And Bob Dylan, in a song years ago, said that we're either busy being born or busy dying. And marriage is like that. It's either getting better or getting worse. And so if we spend too much time making a living, doing other things that we like to do, raising our kids as well, and we lose touch with each other, we're going to drift apart. And so this couple was dealing with that, and they were finally reconnecting with each other, which was really a wonderful thing. And they're such a neat couple. They illustrate a couple of points. I'm going to tell you a bit more about them. She would come home from work. He was already at home, and she would be talking about her day, and he would jump right in and give advice. And she was getting very frustrated with him because she didn't want advice. She just wanted to be listened to. And so he was trying very hard to pull back from the advice. And this is about the time I met them. And I said to him, you know, I think she probably just wants you to listen to her and acknowledge what she's going through. And he'd already stopped giving advice. And then she was frustrated with him because he wasn't saying anything. And so when they came in to see me, it was, well, when I did say something, I got into trouble. And then when I stopped saying something, I got into trouble. So what am I to do? And so I said, well, just listen to her feelings, just acknowledge them. It's very important to do that. So off they went. They came back, and they hadn't had as good a week as I thought they would. And so we talked about it. And she said, well, I said I had a frustrating day. And he said, oh, sounds like you had a frustrating day. And then I said, yeah, I'm kind of tired. And he said, it sounds like you're kind of tired. And I said, yeah, I'm a little worried about Tom at work. Oh, you're worried about Tom at work. And then she blew up. She said, if I wanted an echo chamber, I'd go talk into a quiet room or a corner somewhere. I don't want you just repeating what I said. And so he was getting really frustrated now because he was trying so hard to tune in. I said, I forgot to tell you that feelings travel in groups of 5 or 6. You never just get one. So if she says, or if it was the reverse and he says, I'm tired, look for frustrated, or frustrated, look for, you don't have to guess the right feeling, but just hearing the others helps the person to relax and feel understood. And so they were kind of working at that and doing much better with it. So the first attitude really, which they had not been able to embrace because they didn't know really any better, it's common sense. The marriage really has to be priority one. Priority one. And it's really hard to say this to young parents and older parents because our kids are so important to us. I know how important they are. I've got 4 of them. And yet our relationship has to be the priority, and the kids can be just that much below. Remember talking to these parents in a preschool and asking them, there are 40, 45 of them, mostly moms at that time, who's the most important person in your life? And what do you think they said? They all said the same thing, our kids. One woman said, me, which I thought was rather interesting. And I said, what does your husband think of that? And she said, well, he's number one in his life too. I said, oh, well, let me give you my card because I have a hunch you're going to need a little work down the road a bit, but we'll agree to disagree for now. But the rest of them, I told them about the Bob Dylan quote and that we need to make time for each other, even though we're busy raising kids. And so I'm going to give you an example with tea time as a way of sort of keeping the relationship priority one. What I want to do, though, is ask you to think about this a bit, and maybe a little later, when you have some time, you can talk about this. How well did your parents deal with feelings? And we'll conduct a little survey. The 3 options are not well, and bloody awful. And the bloody awful, seems a bit much, but you'd be amazed at how many people grew up in homes where the parents didn't deal very well with feelings at all. And they choose this 3rd option here. And I ask you this question because when I was referring to this couple a few moments ago, I was trying to get them to focus more on the feeling side of their day. And if we grew up, as most of us did, with this philosophy of if you're feeling something, put it away and push on, that's why our parents were brought up. Put it away and push on. What happens over time is the feelings that we're trying to cope with by ignoring them, they tend to build up in the background. And they reach a sort of a lid here. We call it a pressure cooker or a pot, if you like. But once you get up here, road rage happens, depression happens, people get headaches, their bodies hurt, etc. So we've learned over recent years that we have to teach people how to drain down their feelings better, that we can't just ignore them anymore. We have to include them in our discussions. And so that's why I mentioned the first couple had a couple of good examples for us. One was to make the relationship a priority, which they're now doing belatedly. And secondly, to try and hear each other on the feeling level. That skill is called empathy. And it's a basic skill of emotional maturity, if you like. So we'll be talking more about that as well. Well, let's go on to another attitude. The second attitude is to be open to growth or change. And I'm hoping you're open to growth or change. This is one I really emphasize with engaged couples because they're on the verge of entering into their marriages. And it's a time for them to be really aware of the possibilities for growth. And that I want them to be open to growing in the marriage. God will probably mature you, certainly maturing me in my marriage through my relationship with Maureen. And so I'll give you examples of how that goes. But I say to these young people as they're engaged to go forward, are you open to growth? It's a bit late to ask you guys who are married with kids. I'm just assuming you're open to growth or change. But I say to the younger ones who are on the verge, if you're not open to change or growth, you might want to reconsider getting married, because your marriage will challenge you to grow. It will challenge you to improve. And often they're just little changes, but they're significant changes, and they make a big difference. And they're usually the changes anybody living with us, whether in the marriage or elsewhere, anybody would ask us to make these same changes. Making peace with the past sometimes can be a little easier said than done. And basically what this involves is, at some point, if you haven't already done this, talk a bit about your family history, and talk a little bit about the way it was there, whether feelings were talked about or not talked about, how the power was shared in the family, that sort of thing. Any losses that might have occurred. The goal here is to make peace with it. And sometimes things happen in our past that were painful, and we try to deal with it by that old approach of put it away and push on. And yet, it sits in there. It doesn't go away. It sort of contributes to this buildup of internal stress within our lives. So there's a very simple way to make peace with the past, if you like. And when we were training hospice volunteers years ago, one of the things we asked them to do was to write an autobiography, just a little one, nothing too lengthy, but just memories and feelings. And there wasn't one volunteer, prospective volunteer, who didn't thank us greatly for asking them to do that exercise. They went back sort of a little bit here, a little bit there, writing about their memories and feelings. And it sort of awoke within them insight, but also old feelings that had been put away as a little boy or a little girl had a chance to surface. I remember I was talking to a woman one day about growing up in England, and we were chatting a bit about her history, and I asked her for a memory, and she said, well, I remember the day something came up and my dad got mad at me and just told me to go to school. And I went, and she started to cry. And that incident, that misunderstanding with her father had hurt her, but stiff her upper lip or whatever, she just put it away and went to school. And now, as we talked about it years later, those feelings surfaced. And she was, at the time we met, going through another loss, a more recent loss in her life. And this little bit of an event sort of popped to the surface, and some tears came up. So sometimes when we write about the past or talk about it, it brings up old feelings, could be anger or whatever, but to write it down, maybe share it together, and maybe to get your spouse's opinion of what your parents seem to be like from what they've seen, because they may see it a little differently. The goal is to get some objectivity on your past, to be able to talk about your past a little more objectively. Somebody who remembers a deceased parent and can just talk about how bad they were or how good they were does not have an objective understanding of the past. They have a very subjective, somewhat skewed perspective. It's healthier to have that more objective one, where you actually can talk about things that worked and things that didn't work. If perchance, in having this discussion, you bring up some bigger hurts than you expected, don't be afraid to talk to somebody about that. Don't be afraid to seek out a therapist or a good friend whom you can talk about it and have it sort of come out, and it'll lead to some healing for you, which will make you more relaxed and capable to parent your own children in the way you want to parent them. Because the case could be made for hidden feelings from the past influencing the way we parent now. It could be that it skews the way we do it now. We might be too lenient where we should be a bit stronger. We might be too strong where we should be a little more lenient, perhaps. So big topic, making peace with the past, but it's one you can sneak up on and do at your leisure. But I really encourage you to talk about it. But the writing and the talking about it seem to work really well. So listening. The key skill in communication is listening. And if you're wanting to improve any skill in your skill set, learning how to listen more effectively is a really good idea. And I'm sure you probably listen very well now. But what I want to do is sort of give you a few examples of how you might improve your listening so that you're able to be more effective in your marital communication, but also with your kids, because kids really thrive to be listened to. And some of the damage that we feel as adults relates to not being well heard as a child. For instance, if I was upset about something and my mom or dad believed that talking about feelings was weakness or whatever, they might say, oh, that's ridiculous. Don't go there. Don't talk about that. And so those feelings never really got heard, never really got understood. And so for us to listen better now is a good thing to work on. It's not easy. Sounds simple in theory, but it's not the easiest thing to do. Good listeners listen with their eyes as much as their ears, and they're observing the person who's speaking. And I was reading something recently about nonverbal communication, and I'd heard years ago that we communicate probably most of the time, perhaps 85% of the time, non-verbally, and then the rest comes out of our mouths and so forth. So to really watch somebody when you talk to them, I was talking to a couple the other day, and we were doing it on screen as we're doing now, and I'd made a suggestion, and they were both kind of there, and I thought it was a particularly brilliant suggestion, you know, whatever. The guy agreed with me. I could see on the wife's face just a little grimace, a slight grimace, and then a smile. She was going along with it, but she didn't really want to go along with it. So I called her on it, and she was able to make her input known to us both. And she improved on the suggestion. It was really good to hear what she had to say, and he agreed as well. But I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't watched for that little look on her face. It was just a very brief kind of grimace. There are other things to observe, like color. If somebody's getting upset, they get flushed, or they get red in their neck, or it's their tone of voice. You can hear the tone of voice. And if somebody uses a tone of voice with you and you say, don't use that tone of voice with me, they'll deny using it because we don't hear our own tone of voice. When we start to get upset, we don't hear that our voice is increased. And so what's going on there is the emotions behind the words are causing the tone of voice. The emotions behind the defensive behavior are where we're going. And so we're back to feelings again, you see? So if you get a tone of voice, you're going to go looking for a feeling. Are you upset with me? Or you seem to feel passionate about this topic? Always guess what the feeling is. Don't ever tell anybody what they're feeling, because even if they're feeling that, they'll probably deny it. So that guessing is listening a little deeper. It's listening to the feelings behind the observation, if you like. You can try it sometime. You're at work or with friends. They'll say, how are you doing? And you'll say, oh, okay. And they'll say, oh, nice. Well, have a good day. They haven't listened to your tone of voice. A good listener would have picked it up and repeated it and asked you more questions. So don't be afraid to observe. Concentration is huge. And what this invites you to do when you're having your talk time, which I'm going to present to you in a moment, or one of your kids has come to talk to you, even for a moment or two, just make them the only person in the world. When you make them that focused reality for yourself, they'll share whatever they have to share, and they'll feel really good that you're tuning into them. But so often we listen with our motor running. We're thinking about something else, etc., and the person who's talking doesn't feel listened to. You know, in my work, I sit and listen to people several hours a day. And I remember one time, it was years ago, and this probably should have happened more, but it only happened once. The guy said to me, perhaps you didn't hear what I said. And I was a little shocked because I was looking at him, eye contact, I was nodding, doing all the right things as a good listener. But he could see in my eyes that I'd begun to daydream about something. I'd distracted, I'd wandered off briefly. Human enough thing to do, but I'm a psychologist. I'm supposed to listen with my whole being, with my whole heart. I'm being paid to do that, you know, and I would want to do it anyway. And here I drifted off, and this guy called me on it. I was quite interested in that. Others haven't done that, but you know what they've done? I'm listening away, and what happens is they lose their train of thought. They lose their train of thought, and they're looking at me. I'm looking at them. We're nodding and stuff, but I've drifted off briefly, and they lose their train of thought. And I don't daydream when I'm counseling anymore, because the client is more likely to drift off. And then can I tell them where they were? Well, I can't, because I was thinking about something else. So concentration, a great compliment would be that when you talk to that person, it's like you're the only person in the world, the way they listen to you. That would be a super compliment. And it's one I would value very much. I haven't heard it a great deal, but it's one I would value. So concentration means emptying your head for those moments where you're chatting with a child. You can make it brief if you want, or with your spouse. You'll find that the conversation goes much better. The two-step listening response is basically to do with advice. And that couple I told you about earlier, he was jumping right to step two. Step two was the advice. Step one is to hear the feelings, to acknowledge the emotion. And then after you've acknowledged the emotion, if you want, that's empathy, you can have a suggestion. And I actually think it's a very good idea for couples to give each other suggestions. Husband and wife, even in community. I've worked with some sisters and they sort of bond with each other, not unlike family, because they tend to be attracted to a personality that's very different to their own. They complement each other. And husbands and wives complement each other. We have, if you think about it, we have more differences between us than commonality. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But that allows for good advice giving. But the first step is hear the feeling. Now, the brain people, the brain researchers say the right side of our brain is the emotional brain. The left side is the rational brain. And the reality would seem to be that when the right side, the emotional brain, is flooded with a lot of emotion, it's very hard to connect with the more rational left side of the brain. And so the way to settle that down, to open the door between the two parts of your head, if you like, is to acknowledge the feeling, because when a feeling is acknowledged, it tends to settle down, and then the thinking can occur. And then we can come back to the feeling again, because the suggestion may provoke another feeling. I was chatting with a woman the other day, and she was very distraught. I just met her for the first time. And she was talking about this crisis and that loss and this and that. And she was in tears, and we pursued it, and she settled down a bit. And towards the end of the session, she looked so relaxed. It was quite dramatic, actually. It doesn't often appear this dramatic. I thought she was going to go to sleep. She was feeling so relaxed. Why? Because she'd released these feelings, tried to hear her, and once the feelings were acknowledged, they tend to settle down for her, and she felt so much better. So the two-step response is hear the feeling, then give the advice. Don't just jump in and give advice. You don't have to agree or disagree with what you hear. Some people think, well, if I agree, that'll make her happy or him happy. Not necessarily. I think you might get away with that, but disagreeing will get you into trouble. And some people will disagree with what they're hearing to try and help their partner see the other side of the story. But you want to, first of all, accept their side of the story. You want to accept what they're living with, what they're experiencing, because by doing that, they'll then relax enough to maybe think about what they could have done differently. So it's so important that word acceptance is huge. A fellow saying to me, how can I listen to her? Or she could have said, how can I listen to him when I don't agree with the feeling? I said, well, another one said, well, how can I listen if I don't understand the feeling? I don't know where it comes from. You don't have to agree or understand. You just have to accept it. It's not about you or me when we're listening. It's about the person we're listening to. We're trying to tune in to where they're at, to their reality. We're trying to make ourselves one with them. And then afterwards, we can have discussions about how they got to that feeling or what they might do differently. But that key word of acceptance is crucial. So I wanted to mention that to you as well. I don't know whether you've been chatting with anybody and you're listening away and you've heard the story and you pause and then they tell it to you again. You've heard it for the second time now, and okay, you really got it now, so you're pausing there. This is often a guy now listening this way. Sometimes you'll have a woman do it, but a lot of times guys, they're what I call bump on the log listeners, listening away. They got it second time, third time, here it comes. And they get fed up because they're frustrated because I heard you the first time, but you didn't say anything. The speaker will not know they're being listened to unless the listener gives them some feedback. Here's what I'm hearing. Now, in this case, this little girl just lost her first tooth and she's very excited. And it would be very easy to respond to her with a very similar expression. Like there's no denying the excitement that's going on here. And a lot of conversations aren't quite this dramatic, but if I had just given her a stone-faced look or turned away, she would have been upset with me. Whereas I was just as excited as she was. Actually, I assisted a bit in the removal of tooth, so I took a little credit for it, but she was the one who really did the job. So responding helps a person to not be repeating themselves. And so that's very important. All right, enough listening skills. You know these things. I'm just reviewing them with you. Let me get on to the tea time. And this is something I get couples to do as a way of short for talk time to help them keep in touch. This is such a simple thing to do, to keep yourselves connected, keep yourselves busy being born as a couple, busy being born in community with the people you care for. And so when I first came up with this strategy, it seemed like such a common sense thing to request. I remember coming home and saying to Maureen, it's time for our daily talk time. And she looked at me, and I remember this very distinctly. She doesn't, but I do remember it. She simply went, just like that. And I thought, what? She said to me, leave the psychology at work. I said, sounds like you're frustrated with me. And she went, because that still sounds like too psychological for her. So I said, okay, forget the daily talk time. Would you like some tea? And she likes tea, so it's usually yes. Or at this time we didn't have kids. I said, do you want to go for a walk? And she said yes. And so we'd have tea, go for a walk, and do this talk time. And she was very comfortable with that. The other thing I can mention about this strategy of connecting is that I initiate 95% of them. Not so much these days because we've been around each other for a long time. She also initiates now. But in the early days, I would initiate. Now I could have sat back and said, if my wife really loved me, she would be willing to initiate a talk time. But she doesn't feel the same need to do these talks as I do. These talks are more my thing, if you like. And actually, when she gets into them, she really enjoys them too. But she doesn't think to initiate them. So I'm not going to wait around for my wife to read my mind. I'm going to invite her to do the tea time or have a cup of tea or go for a walk. And if she says yes, as she does most of the time, we're off to the races. If I'm sitting around pouting, waiting for her to read my mind and initiate the talk time, it's unfair to her and it wastes too much time. Life's too short. So what is this tea time? Well, there's 4 steps. The first one's to schedule it, to make sure that it happens. You say, my communication with my spouse is far too important to schedule. Well, I know it's very important, but you're busy. You've got kids. You're busy with your jobs. If you don't nail down a time, general time, for us, it's between 8 and 10 at night. If you don't nail that time down, there's a good chance you won't get it. So this is important. Make sure you find the time, mutually agreed to time. Because some couples like to start, one partner wants to get up first thing in the morning and have a talk. And the other one doesn't even know who they are until 9 o'clock. Or that person in the evening wakes up and come 10 or 11 or 12, they want to have a talk, and that morning person is faded around 9:30. So it's got to be mutually agreed to time. 15 minutes is usually the time I would suggest you do. And this is particularly, there's 2 reasons. One is that when you narrow the time frame down, you're going to get better traction, more production in this talk time. If it's too open-ended, you could roll around a bit. You might not get down to where you really want to go. But the second thing is, I've noticed that with most couples I've met, they're not all that different from us. One of us is more into talking, as it turns out, in this case, it's me. And my wife didn't feel the same need to share. And so to get her to do an hour-long tea time each night would be overwhelming for her. And probably wouldn't be that necessary because I'd just be repeating myself. I don't have that much to say. She doesn't either. I mean, we could expand it, but I kept it short for the non-talker, for the one who might prefer to do something a little less. So 15 minutes. Well, we're back to feelings again. And the feelings, again, are the right brain. If there's an emotion sitting there, you want to identify it. Feeling okay, you look good, how's it going? It can be, don't ask how you're feeling, okay? Don't ask how you're feeling, because some people can tell you, but most people don't always know how they're feeling. And they'll say, I don't know. And you can say, well, how can you not know? I remember saying to Maureen, so how are you feeling about this situation? She says, I don't know. I said, I mean, how come you don't know? You're an intelligent woman, da-da-da. And she said, well, I'm starting to feel frustrated. And I said, well, I'm frustrated with this conversation because you're bugging me. Oh, and I forgot, I'm not practicing what I preached here. What I need to do is guess a feeling. I can guess it. You look tired, you feel tired, and we're getting to an age where that's usually a pretty safe guess. And you younger parents, that's a safe one for you too, because you're often more tired than you want to be. But just to guess. So I said to her, are you worried about something? And she looked at me and said, no, actually I'm not. I'm just a bit frustrated with this situation that's happening at school. She was working at a school at the time. So my guessing the feeling helped her to read her own feeling. And you see how cool this is, because when I try to listen to her, it helps her to hear herself better. She may not know how she's feeling, but when I guess a feeling, it helps her to go inside and go, no, this is how it goes. And the very interesting paradoxical thing here is that when I try to listen to her, on a deeper level, I also start to hear myself better, partly from her help, but just it seems to grow in me to my own awareness of my own feeling. So you find the time, check out each mood, the mood for the moment, and move right into what'd you do today. Talk a little bit for 4 or 5 minutes about your day. And my hunch is the part of the day you're going to talk about is the part that moved you in some way and touched you emotionally in some way. And so your spouse, your partner, your friend should be able to, without much trouble, pull a feeling out of there for you or a guess as to what it might be. What we're trying to get at here is what your day did to you. But to ask the question, what did your day do to you? If you're observing your feelings during the day, you might have no trouble with that. But what I prefer you do is just simply talk about what you did today and let your spouse who's listening to you try to tune in to the feeling that might be there. I have a guy who's not really big on tea times. And he said to me, you know, this is about 3 weeks ago, he said to me, I really don't know what to say in the tea time. I'm not sure what to tell her about my day. It's a busy day. And I said, let me make a suggestion. When you do the tea time with Samantha, what you're going to say is irrelevant. Your job in the tea time is to get her to talk about her day. That's your job. And you're to reflect what she felt about her day. That's the work you need to do. Let Samantha inquire about your day, and whatever's important to share there will start to come out in the sharing of that discussion back and forth. So just ask her how she's doing, ask him how he's doing, back and forth. You'll get to it. And that doesn't take a lot of time. And then you do business. This is where you make decisions related to who has to do what, when. I'm trying to have my cup that matches the color on the screen. I'm going to come back to doing business because that's where we consult and collaborate. But the first few moments of the talk time are really just to connect, exchange a bit about your day, settle your brain down so you can talk about projects, talk about plans, talk about parenting, and we'll come back to that. That's the business part, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Some time ago, I discovered something that I called, it's just my own term, flat marriage syndrome. And what it is, I'll describe it for you. A flat marriage, and I've seen probably 400 of these, I've seen a lot of them. The guy comes in and he says, you know, could be a woman too, says, I love my spouse, but I don't feel in love with her, with him. And sometimes they've actually started to fall in love with somebody else because they're not talking to their spouse at home. They're too busy to do that, but they started talking to somebody somewhere else. And that started to generate some feelings for them. And so this time that wasn't the case, thank goodness. And I said, so you love your wife, you know that up here somewhere, but down here you don't feel it. And he said, yes. And I said, is it important to you that you feel this love for your wife or your husband? And they said, yes. And I said, well, I sure celebrate that with you. I think it's really important after even years of marriage to feel the buzz, to still have that connection. It might quiet down a bit, but it's still very rich and very special. So let's see if we can get it back for you. So I said to him, so by any chance are you an easygoing guy? And he said, invariably, he or she will say, yes, as a matter of fact, I am. I said, how do you feel about conflict? I don't really like conflict very much. Oh, okay. So if something's really important to you, will you bring it up? Oh yeah, I'll bring it up if it's important. Well, how often do you do that? Well, not very often, maybe a couple times a year, maybe. Yeah. And when you bring something up, does sometimes explode because things have loaded up? Oh, sometimes it does. And that distracts everybody because the drama takes away from the message. So I said, okay, your fear of conflict is getting into trouble here, because if you start to hold back frustration or upset or worry or annoyance with your spouse, what'll happen is all the warm, fuzzy feelings will shut down too. It seems like emotionally, we either get them out there or we keep them in. And so if you're trying to keep your love alive, if you like, you have to be able to tell each other when you're frustrated with each other or annoyed with each other or whatever. I wouldn't do that right off the go in a tea time necessarily. I would try and sort some, that's maybe the business part, or it may just pop out at some point. But if you're a non-fighter, if you're a lover and not a fighter, you don't like conflict. And your spouse might even say, conflict? We're not conflicting, we're just having a discussion. If he wants conflict, let me show him. And she gets quite excited. but they come from different cultures, different family cultures. And in his family, they never fought about anything. It was all closed, quiet, sort of an icy experience at times. Her family, there's a lot of drama, and they weren't even fighting. They were just, and when they did, it was a little more dramatic, but it's a different culture, you see. And so in their marriage, they had different comfort levels. So I got the wife in, and he started opening up with her, and we instituted this timeout strategy for them, that he was going to speak more, but if it got off the track and started to get too negative, he or she could call a timeout. And she agreed. She agreed. And it was funny, this first time we met and we were talking about stuff. For an easygoing guy, he was somebody who had stockpiled quite a bit of stuff. You know, he was bringing up stuff from years ago that bothered him. And he was bringing it up and bringing it up. And I think he felt safe that I was there. I don't know, but I watched her and her face. At first, she was quite interested. And then she started to get more tense and was starting to get very angry. So I stopped him. I said, look, you got to pace yourself, okay? If you're going to bring up stuff, you got to watch your listener and make sure you're observing how she's doing with it. You don't want to overwhelm her. And I said, are you getting angry listening to all this? And she says, I am, but I'm sure glad to hear it, because I've known for years there's things he hasn't been telling me. He's been too easy on decisions, going my way too much, that kind of thing. So it's so important to be able to speak your truth, and then to do business together. So you agree in advance, we'll do timeout. By the way, if you're having a discussion, you don't get a shot in and then call timeout. That's dirty pool. You say something, they say something, you say something, timeout. Or it's in place of saying something. You agree in advance. You don't bring this up out of the blue. So timeout. Then what you do is you self-reflect. And this is not always easy to do. If you go up to the gospel, it's in 2 gospels where it talks about the person who's trying to help the other take the speck out of their eye. And in one of the gospels, it says, why would you even try to help your neighbor take the speck out of their eye when you've got a plank in your own? Take the plank out of your own eye so you can see clearly to help your neighbor take the speck out of their eye. That's what self-reflection is. If we end up in an argument, Maureen and I, or you and your spouse, we're both at fault. Maybe stopped listening, maybe said something rude. I don't know what it would be, but we self-reflect. And then we self-correct in our own mind, and then we're ready for what's called the time in, where we discuss what we figured out. So let's go back to that first couple for a moment. Let's say they knew about the timeout, time in strategy. And when she got frustrated with him for giving advice, let's say, or echoing her, or for some other reason, or maybe he got upset with her because she was getting annoyed with him, they could call timeout. And they do a little thinking. And you know, this would be easier to do after having had some of the sessions we had, because they had a bit more insight. But they would both be thinking, and he could have thought to himself, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to give advice. I'm supposed to just let her have her feelings and then maybe give advice. I jump in with the advice too quickly. So when he does the time in, he would sort of comment on his jumping in with the advice giving. She, on the other hand, would say, you know, I remembered what we talked about earlier. I forget sometimes that when you're giving me advice that you're probably uncomfortable. And this is interesting, because that couple, when they were just about done, I said to her, you remember back when he was giving advice? How was he feeling? You know, she didn't know. And this is so interesting, because she was frustrated with him for not listening to her. And yet in those moments, she wasn't listening to him. So there's a simple rule, 2 of them actually. Always listen, even when you're talking. Listen to your listener, in case something, that look on the face that I mentioned earlier. The second rule is that if you can, I forget the second rule, it'll come back to me. So listen to your listener, and then she didn't. And so we went back, and it turns out he was nervous, or he was upset for her feeling upset. And it was his upset that caused him to give the advice. So when they did the time in, she was able to remember that and talk about that, and that helped a lot. So that's the time in. So we're going to move now towards consult and collaborate, the business part of the talk time, if you like. And this is where we can run into some challenges. And when I'm working with couples, I'll often ask them what their similarities are. And usually it's these 4 that will come up. Not always the sense of humor, unfortunately, but these 4: strength of character. My experience has been that we marry somebody just as strong-willed as we are. just as strong-willed. We may wear it differently. Like my dad used to withdraw. My mom would storm a bit. I used to think she was the stronger person, but I discovered that he was just as strong. It takes a lot of strength to withdraw like that. You usually marry somebody who has a similar level of woundedness, wounded in different ways, hurt in different ways, feel insecure in different ways. We have similar values, and of course, we try to share the sense of humor. So there are lots of differences, though, and you can talk about these. These are just a few: morning and night, neat, not so neat, and others. These are very typical differences, and there's probably 25, 30 more, and these tend to be fairly common. So you can say, well, what's God got in mind here? Because he gets two people attracted to each other. One of them wants to talk a lot, the other one doesn't. One's kind of strict, the other one's easygoing. What's he doing? Why would he get people who are so different together? Does he find that entertaining, or what's going on? He wants you and I to become saints. He wants us to become better people. And when we do business together, when we consult and collaborate in our relationships, we grow. This is the growth I was referring to earlier. I'll give you a quick example. When we were young parents, we had different approaches to parenting. I was on the strict side, which is interesting because my mother was strict and I used to push back. And my wife was on the easygoing side. Her mom was strict too, but she tended to compensate by being more easygoing. And so we got talking. We had the good cop, bad cop discussion. And it went like this. She said to me, I said to her first, because I initiated this. I said, I always have to be the bad cop because you're never the bad cop. You're always the good cop, always saying yes. Somebody has to say no. Somebody has to have boundaries. She smiled and she said to me, I think you got it wrong. The only reason I'm being the good cop is because you're always the bad cop. If you just mellow out and be the good cop, I could be the bad cop. And we both smiled and laughed a bit. And we realized that we both were making a good point. So we started to collaborate. We started to come up with our way of parenting, which allowed us to come up with some strategies that were more effective because I mellowed out, she firmed up. And this is another attitude. This is an attitude around willingness to meet the partner in the middle. A couple in earlier today, she was saying, my husband always likes to wear that golf shirt when he goes out. And if I asked him to wear a nicer shirt, and he doesn't, he just stays with a golf shirt. And I wanted to say to him, when you go out, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing yourselves as a couple. It doesn't hurt to stretch into the world or the preferences of the other person. Maureen said to me one day that she wanted me to close the cupboard doors in the entrance of our house. And we're on a 2-story house. And I walked in and said, what cupboard doors? Like I didn't even see them really. She says, first impression when people come in our house, open closet, looks messy. See, our generation, the house is an expression of the woman more so than the man. And if the house is a mess, they don't think, oh, Dennis is a messy housekeeper. Maureen would think that they would see that in her. And I thought, what's the big deal? And then I thought for a moment, I don't care about the closet doors. I don't even really care if people think our house is messy, but she does. And I care for her. And because I care for her, I'm going to embrace this request of hers and do it. That's another attitude. That's a deeper attitude of, out of my love for you, I'm willing to go your way on some stuff. More often than not, though, we've got to find the middle ground. I don't want you caving in. Like the guy who was afraid of conflict, he caved in, and they got to a point where he fell out of love with his wife. So it's not caving in, it's genuinely embracing the wishes of the other and going ahead. You know the golden rule, we've heard it forever. And what I've done is I slightly adjusted it, and through the grace of God, it's the same golden rule, but I've adjusted it slightly. The marriage golden rule is do unto your spouse the way he wants done unto them. Because we have a tendency to love each other the way we want to be loved, not necessarily the way the partner wants to be loved. And so to do a little consulting, early in our marriage, we hadn't been married long, Maureen's dad died. He died very suddenly, skiing, had a heart attack skiing on one of the local ski hills. It was an awful moment. It was just an awful moment. And I could see Maureen's great pain. And I picked her up at work and her boss was sort of standing beside her. And I when I got her home, I gave her a big hug, and she was like a pole. She wasn't responding to the hug, and it was confusing to me. And I thought, and this little voice said, "It's okay. Give me space. Give me space." You see, she learned in her family culture that when you're upset, perhaps there weren't that many hugs available. I don't know, but she learned that you withdraw, and it was comfortable for her to back away. And I had to learn to comfort her in the way she wanted to be comforted, not necessarily the way I wanted to comfort her. I'm the one who wants the hugs. So later on, a number of years later, when my dad died, she was there hugging me right away. If it had been earlier in our marriage, she would have given me space and said, well, that's probably what he needs. But no, we tend to do unto others as we want done unto ourselves. We take that a little too literally. In the general sense, it's wonderful, but a little research doesn't hurt, and we do unto the spouse as they want done unto them. This is a great book. Take a look at it when you get a chance. The 5 Love Languages. It talks a lot about the ways people like to be loved. It talks about some people like attention. Other people like to have quality time. Some people like acts of service. Some people like romance. And those sorts of, there's one more as well. And I venture to say that you probably generally fit into one of them, and it'd be interesting for you to know the way each other likes to be loved, because that way when you're making the effort, it'll be more appreciated than if you're just doing it and not getting anywhere with it at all. So we go from my way to our way. We go from my way to our way, and to quote some great movement, we go from me to we. We manage to become more collaborative wherever possible. And the decisions that couples make when they're collaborating are really quite amazing. They're able to come up with solutions that I have trouble improving upon as a psychologist outside. The wisdom that we have in our relationship, God releases that when we love each other. When we love and try and find collaborative solutions, there's a wisdom there that shows up. It's very, excuse me, it's very, very spiritual. Forgiveness is huge. We've heard the church talk about it forever. It's a spiritual reality. I tell you, psychologically, it is too. If you don't forgive somebody from the past, and this is your piece for the past again, what can happen is it can prevent you from being forgiving in the present. So forgive and move ahead. They may not deserve forgiveness. People don't understand what forgiveness is. It's an act of the will. It's a gesture of love. It liberates you from the wounding. Whether they deserve it or not has nothing to do with it. And you start again. And one of the things that I learned early in my marriage was that it was important, even when something didn't go right, to start again, to start over, to begin each day with fresh eyes. I remember somebody saying to me, I begin each day seeing my wife, my husband, with fresh eyes. We begin again, and we don't get stuck in our grudges, because they get in the way of loving each other the way we want to love, right? So we try and see each other with new eyes, and that makes all the difference. Date night, you'll hear a lot of people talking about marriage, and date night's important, and it certainly is. But you know, these tea times, they're like mini dates. I wouldn't bother with a date night if you're not doing the mini dates, because the mini dates set the stage for a nice night out, where you can really have an hour and a half of tea time if you like, or fun with your friends. But to go out on a date night just with yourselves and not with other couples, it's great to go out with other couples for sure. But I would do that 1 in 3 times. 2 times I would try and just go out, the 2 of you. You need to reconnect over a glass of wine or whatever you prefer there. And when our kids were very young, we didn't have the money necessarily or the babysitters to get out there and have a date. We do it once in a while. I remember on our anniversary, my mother-in-law would come and watch the kids for an afternoon and evening, and we got this special time out. And it occurred to me we weren't getting out a lot, but you know what we did? We did home-based dates. We'd feed the kids, get them distracted, maybe let them watch a movie, get the younger ones to bed, and we'd put a candle on the table, have a steak or a special salmon dish or whatever, and we'd have a little time there, a glass of wine, sort of a home date, and it worked very well. Sense of humor, if we can laugh together, and I said earlier, life's too important to be taken seriously, to share humor. When I meet a couple and we're doing some work, and I can see that they have a sense of humor, we can have a lot of fun, even though we're growing into a new reality together. So to share your humor, but not sarcasm, not put down humor. I'm really good at put down humor, not with my wife, but with a friend. You know how we joke with each other, and I've been trying to clean that up and just have a healthier sense of humor instead of this sort of put down humor. It's an old habit that's not easy to get rid of. Learn a few skills. Your parents, learn a few parenting skills. I know you're going to be doing that through this program series. There's some very good parenting books out there. This is a particularly good one. It talks about the right brain flooding, and when a child's getting very dramatic, it's because they're flooding, and there's a way to tune into them. This Dan Siegel guy's a renowned brain researcher, does really good work. And what I would say, usually couples, one's more of a reader than the other, don't insist that your partner read the same book. Why don't you read it? Share the ideas. This one's particularly easy to read. There's pictures and summaries and so forth. One of you read it, maybe the other read a different book, and then talk about them. And you decide as a couple whether you like the book or not. People write all kinds of parenting books. They think they're the end all be all. No, the people who will decide the best parenting strategy that's right for your children will be you two. But you have to collaborate. You have to work together to bring out the wisdom, right? Well, this is a wonderful book. Wrote this a few years ago, so I couldn't help but plug it here. We sell it through our office. Marriage Can Be Great. Married life for life and loving it. So I thought I'd mention that in passing. And just as I wind up so we can have a few questions, I thought I'd show you our family. Our sons, Chris and Jeff, are standing at the back. Joanna and Carolyn's sitting there, and Jeff and Carolyn are married, and those are our 4 grandkids. And there you are, so you have that. So there you are. I think that covers pretty much what I wanted to say to you. I've run through it very quickly. I hope you caught it. I have a handout, which is called How to Survive in Marriage While Raising Kids. It's a short 4-page thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it to Sister John Mary and her team, and they're going to email it out to you in the next few days. And then you can go to our website, which is my name again, and denisboyd.com. And we have a newsletter we put out called Psych Health. And we have 20 years of Psych Health there with parenting articles, this and that, to do with grief and loss, you name it, they're there. They're all free. You can go and read them at your leisure. And if there's anything more we can do for you, you just let us know, and keep having a great marriage. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Dennis. I think some of the takeaways I have, even as you mentioned, even as a religious sister in community life and relational dynamics, just that ability to really listen with the whole person, and to listen to the one who is listening to you. Yeah. To get a real sense of what they're taking and how they're responding.
We forget that sometimes.
Yeah, very much so. So this is a time where if any of you that are here would want to ask a question of Dennis, you can put it in the Q&A section, and we will ask that question. I do have one question here. I have 2 questions actually, but I'll start with the first one. What if you're into tea time, but your spouse is not? Is there any way to sort of navigate that to help motivate the other side?
Yeah, I would suggest an experiment where you give them a whirl and see if they work for you. Maybe try them for a week, do one every second day or something. And the spouse who doesn't really like the tea time idea, I found that once they get into it and discover that it's really not so bad, and it brings the 2 of them closer, it works very well. So I'd say experiment. Number 2 is remember what I said, the strategy is 15 minutes. The spouse who's into tea time would really prefer to talk for an hour, hour and a quarter. Let's go, let's get her done. And so, come on, we're doing a deal for you here. We've got it squeezed down to 15 minutes. You can give back a bit there. It's a pretty good deal for the non-talker.
Very good. And another question here is, do you find that there's typically one parent that takes the role of, if you will, the good cop versus bad? It doesn't matter if it's the father or mother who leads in these areas of good cop, bad cop, or you see it both ways.
It's better to mix it up. I think I've been getting better at being the good cop, and Maureen learned to be more of the bad cop. But we're just both good cops with a bit of she became a bit stronger in her boundaries and her expectations, and I mellowed out. So I think we both ended up improving, but I probably still had a bit more of the heavy edge, and she was a lighter one. But they could tell when they were listening to us that some of the other parent was in that. Otherwise, you typecast one parent as being the bad one or the strong one, and kids will be alienated. They'll pull away. Whereas if they get a taste of that, of both with the parents, I think it's better.
And what happens with the situation where you have some young children and every night is consumed, not you're just exhausted by the night because just even trying to get the kids down. How do you even, sometimes parents have just said, I don't even have that 10, 15 minutes for myself, let alone for my spouse. So how to navigate that with the children involved?
It's really a challenge. I appreciate that. More days than not, you're going to be really tired. But the reality is that we're either getting better or we're getting worse. We're either drifting apart or we're connecting. So tired or not, we need to try and keep in touch. So it could be a mini tea time. It could be something that happens earlier in the day. What makes it a tea time is there's feeling content. We're not just talking information exchange here. We're talking about getting some emotion in. So let's say you're really, really tired. You're not too tired some nights to watch Netflix or something else, and you just want to veg out. I appreciate that. But even if you take 10 minutes and you just talk about how tired you are, on the tiredness scale, where are you? And then you'll energize yourself and you have more energy to have the rest of the conversation. So don't be afraid to talk about how tired you are. But other stuff will pop up, and it'll be nice to get that out of there as well. So it takes a bit of determination for sure. I appreciate that.
Also, I have here, if you mentioned early on the whole reality of being objective about your past and the way your parents did well and maybe at times failed. But what to do, how to work through that past, or how to get to that place of objectivity is a question here. Is there a particular technique? Is there something to work with?
I think the impact of the past will lessen through the writing about it and the talking about it together, because the feelings that never were shared are coming out now. The working through of it, though, is interesting. Some therapists have suggested, just going to clear my throat again here, if I can find my little microphone button, that you think about your past and write about it, then go talk to your parent about it. And I would not suggest that. If your parent comes to you and says, I think I could have done better, do you want to talk about it? Okay. But most of them did the best they could with what they had to work with. So, where we work it through? We work it through in community. I think we worked it through in our marriage. I've learned to unlearn certain things, yelling too loud, for instance, because of the sensitivity of my wife. She's learned to come out of her shell because of the sensitivity I have. So the marriage takes on the power of the historical family. I think it's no accident that the church treats marriage or believes it's a sacrament. It is a sacrament, a vocation, because I think it's where God helps us heal from the past.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't coughed all day, Sister, and here probably telling me it's just about time to stop. But yeah, so that working it through, sometimes, as you know, therapy can help.
Yes, that's right. Here's a question. Is it better to deal with criticism of tone or pointing out the tone of your spouse in the moment, or wait till like a tea time, wait till there's time to express the emotions behind that?
It's a good idea. I mean, if you can do it on the fly, you sound upset, or are you annoyed with me? But maybe it's too busy right now. So when you do the tea time, earlier when we were talking about X, you seemed annoyed with me. I don't know whether you were or not. Oh, I was just frustrated about, and you'll find out that it may not be about you at all, but either would probably be good. But yeah, it gets very busy. So just save it for the tea time, but don't save all your complaints and stuff for the tea time. You're trying to actually connect with each other and debrief your day in general.
Mm-hmm. So basically the tea time is not just a complaint time, it's really to connect.
Right.
not to point out the
Right.
areas. Here's a question. What if your partner, your spouse, always avoids talking about family issues and says they don't need to talk about it if it's suggested, or that they don't need help if it's suggested to seek help?
It's interesting because if I ask somebody to write about their family history, I had a guy today, and he had a big loss when he was in grade 11, and he's not grieved that loss properly, and it's getting in the way now. And I said to him, what about this writing idea? I want you to write a letter to this person. Do you want to do it? And he said, no. I said, good, because if you do it, you'll get the best payoff. The people usually who don't want to go there, when they go there, get the best payoff. So I would say, what's the big deal? If there's nothing to be avoided, it's something to talk about. But if you're not comfortable right now, think about it. Maybe we can talk about it some other time. But just, I want you to know that if you want to talk about it, I'm open to listening. I would take that more low-key approach rather than trying to push it.
So in some way, step back and allow them that space. Yeah. And I imagine there is an element where pointing out that someone needs help, sometimes it's helpful to get your own help working with a spouse who you feel isn't listening or doesn't think they need help.
There's always something we can learn. How we deal with our spouse, we could always probably improve. And so I think that's a good point. We need to take ownership of our own approach as much as possible, but also challenge the other person a bit to come to us. I mean, to let my spouse get away with things that are hurting her or hurting her relationships is not love for her. So, there's this moment of truth sometimes that we have to have, but it's done out of love, right?
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I think those are the questions that were put forth. But Dennis, once again, thank you so much for your time, for your presentation, for your commitment to marriage and families, and which, as we know, is one of the goals is within the Archdiocese is to really build up marriage and family life. And so thank you for being part of that building up. And I'm sure you might get a few calls at Denis Boyd and Associates to have a few discussions around these areas. So, and hopefully we'll get you back for another presentation at some point.
Thank you, sister. Thanks all for being here.
Yeah. And just to let you all know that we do, as Dennis pointed out, we do have 2 more presentations coming up. Next Monday, the presentation is Parenting on the Wings of Faith for Single Parents. So if you know anyone who is a single parent and is seeking, once again, some guidance, maybe a place to ask questions around parenting, that will be next Monday, given the presentation given by Don Lassell, who actually is a counselor therapist at Denis Boyd and Associates. And then the following Monday, in which we'll finish off the series, is Surviving Summer at Home, How Knowing Your Child's Temperament and Love Language Will Help. And this will be given by a couple who is raising, I believe, 8 children. So Francis and Matt will be presenting on the love languages and temperaments of children. So we are blessed and look forward to hearing their presentation. You can register, as you see on the slide, at the beholdvancouver.org website and those you can register at this point. That's open and live at this point. So once again, thank you, Dennis, for your presentation. Thank you all for coming and being a part of this evening, and we hope to see you signed up for the others. Please spread the word, especially to, I think in a particular way, if you know parents who are single, we're really trying at the Archdiocese to extend that outreach to single parents and those who have gone through divorce. And so please extend that invite for that. And with that, we'll close off the evening. Blessings and sleep well when you get there. And may you have a little tea time together before you head into the night. All right. God bless. Thank you.